Hello friends and welcome back. Today we'll be making a warm and cozy, soft and snuggly crochet hoodie sweater. So if you're looking for a sweater or a sweatshirt that has all the bells and whistles, then you've definitely come to the right place. Now before we begin, let's get our tools ready. For this project, I am using Comfy Cotton Blend by Lion Brand in the color Whipped Cream. We would also need a 4.5mm hook, a tapestry needle, measuring tape, a pair of scissors, and some stitch markers. First, we'll be working on the back panel, so let's take off our yarn and work up a slip knot. For this project, I'm working on a size M, so I'll be working a total of 75 chains. Just make sure that when you work your chains, it should end on an odd number. We'll be working from the bottom up, so basically we're working on the width now. So we'll chain one and turn our work. You can see these little bumps on the chains. This is where we'll be inserting our hook. So we'll work a single crochet stitch on each bump across, like so. Just make sure that you turn your work to the back and you'll be able to see the bump. And the reason why I'm working on the bump this time is because I will not be working on any kind of edging on this first row. But if you prefer not to work on the bump side, that's fine too. Once you've completed working your single crochet on this row, if you turn your work to the bottom, you will be able to see the little pretty stitches that you've made through working on the bump side of the chain. So we'll chain one and turn our work. Now for the next row, we'll be working a front post half double crochet stitch. So we insert a hook behind that first post and work one half double crochet. Yarn over, insert your hook through the second stitch through to the second post and work a half double crochet. We'll continue working this front post half double crochet all the way across, and I'll meet you back here once that's done. I've worked my way all the way down. Here I have one more stitch left, so I'll be working my last front post half double crochet stitch. And to even out the number, I will work just one regular half double crochet on this last stitch. Now we'll chain one, we'll turn our work, and here you can see we have this knit-like stitch which we've created by working the front post half double crochet. Now on the next stitch, we'll be repeating the last two stitches that we worked on. So we'll be working the single crochet stitch on this row, followed by another front post half double crochet on the following row. And I'll be repeating these two rows until I have a total of 6 rows or 3 sets. And once you're done, it should look something like this. Now for the next row, we'll be working a new stitch called the feather stitch. To work on this stitch, we'll first need to work on the base. So the base would be a half double crochet stitch, chain one, we'll skip the next stitch and half double crochet on the following stitch. We'll be continuing this chain one, skip one, half double crochet all the way across, and I'll meet you back here once we're there. Okay, so now we've completed the base of this feather stitch row. We'll chain one and turn our work. This is where the interesting stitch happens. On that first stitch, we'll work a regular half double crochet stitch, yarn over, insert your hook, drop a loop and pull through all loops. Now that chain space that we did earlier, we'll insert a hook and drop a loop. We'll yarn over and we'll insert a hook through that skipped single crochet stitch that we made earlier and drop a loop. Now we'll have 4 loops on our hook. We'll yarn over, insert our hook through the next chain space and drop a final loop. We should have 6 loops on our hook. Yarn over and pull through all loops. So this is our first feather stitch that we made. We'll chain one and we'll do that again. Now we'll insert a hook through that second chain space, draw up a loop, yarn over, insert a hook through that single crochet chain that we skipped earlier, 4 loops on our hook. We'll yarn over and insert a hook through the next chain space, draw up a loop, 6 loops on our hook, and we'll pull through all 6 loops to close. It could be a little bit tricky depending on the yarn that you're using. So here we'll chain 1. Now we'll just be repeating this entire step again. Once you've got the hang of this, we'll just be repeating this whole process all the way until the end, and I'll show you how to close this row. Once you've reached the last chain space on that row, here we'll work one more feather stitch. Now on this last feather stitch, we'll chain 1, and to close the row, look for that last half double crochet stitch that we did on the previous row and work a half double crochet stitch. And you've just completed your first row of feather stitches. Isn't that pretty? I think this feather stitch is really unique because it is the same on the front and the back. But one thing to note that it is a little bit poofy and it does use up quite a bit of yarn. Now let's go ahead and work on the second row. Just like we did before, we'll look for that first stitch and we'll work a half double crochet. Now we'll insert a hook through that space that we made earlier, drop a loop, yarn over, we'll look for the next chain space at the bottom and drop another loop. We have 4 loops on our hook. We'll look for the next chain space after the first feather stitch, yarn over, insert a hook and drop another loop, yarn over and pull through all loops. Chain 1 and we'll repeat the steps again. Insert a hook to that chain space, drop a loop, insert your hook to the bottom chain space. If you stretch the stitches a little bit, you'll be able to see the chain space at the bottom. Drop a loop, yarn over, and insert your hook to that chain space after the second feather stitch. Yarn over, pull through all loops, and chain 1. Now let's do this feather stitch all the way across and I'll show you how to close this row. Once you've worked your way all the way down and you have 2 stitches left, you'll work your last feather stitch as usual, chain 1 and work 1 half double crochet on that last stitch. Now continue working on this stitch all the way across and until you've reached your desired height of your sweater. For me, I have worked a total of 75 rows in total. Don't forget to mark the time and come back once you're done. Here I've just finished my back panel. Now go ahead and make a second piece for the front panel, but stop anywhere between the 18th to 20th last row to start working on the neckline. So because the stitches are exactly the same as what we did with the back panel, I went ahead and completed the front panel all the way up to the neckline, which is about 18 rows less than the back. I placed a stitch marker right in the center of my row. You can find your center by basically just folding your front panel in half and placing a stitch marker there. Now let's go straight into working on the neckline. For the first stitch, we'll just work our regular half double crochet followed by the feather stitches. We'll do this all the way until we reach the stitch marker. Now I've just reached my stitch marker here. This is my last stitch, and on my stitch marker We won't be working on that half double crochet stitch that we normally do to end a row. We'll just chain one and we'll turn our work. So this will create a decrease of 1 stitch. Now on the next stitch, I'll insert my hook and work a feather stitch directly. So remember, in order to have a decrease, we will not be working on that 1 half double crochet stitch at the beginning of the row. Chain 1 and continue working the feather stitch all the way across without doing any more decrease. Chain 1, you turn your work and you work your way back all the way to the stitch marker, and I'll meet you back here at the next stitch marker. Okay, so now I've just worked 2 rows, and now my second row, in order to decrease, I have 2 stitches left on my row. I'll be working on this last stitch. So I'll work my last feather stitch and insert my hook through that last stitch, chain 1, and that's it. I will not be working the half double crochet stitch, and I'll turn my work, which creates another decrease. I'll continue to work my decrease along the neckline for a total of 15 rows, and I'll meet you back here once we're there. I've just completed 15 decrease rows, and I have another 3 more rows to go. So this will be for the shoulder panel. On this last 3 rows, I will not be doing any decrease, and I'll be working a regular feather stitch as normal. So I'll work my half double crochet stitch followed by the feather stitch all the way across, and I'll do this for a total of 3 rows. And since you know how to do this already, I'll go ahead and jump straight to the end. Once you've completed all 3 rows, we'll go ahead and work on the other side. From the stitch marker, we'll just insert a hook on the stitch after the stitch marker. And because I have an odd number of stitches on this row, my stitch marker will just mark the center point of the neckline. Draw up a loop. Now we'll be working on a mirror image. So for this side, we'll be doing a decrease. So we'll go ahead and go straight into a feather stitch, like so. And proceed to feather stitch all the way across and repeat the entire steps that you did on the other side, and I'll meet you back here once that's all done. Now we've just finished our front panel, and this is how the neckline should look like. Now we'll go ahead and seam the front and back panel together. Place your front panel on top of the back panel on the wrong side. Now we'll be seaming the shoulders first. Insert your hook through the front and back panel at the shoulders, through the first stitch, chain 1, and single crochet both panels together. You can also pick up the excess tail while you're seaming across. And once you've reached the end of the shoulder, just chain 1 to secure and bind off. Now go ahead and seam off the other side of the shoulder, and I'll meet you back once that's done. Now that we've seamed up the shoulders, we'll go ahead and move on to seaming the sides. Turn your work to the side and place a stitch marker 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters for size M for the armhole. At the bottom, we'll also place stitch markers for the pockets. Here I've placed the second stitch marker 8 inches or 20 centimeters from the bottom, and the third stitch marker 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters from the bottom. Now go ahead and insert your hook through that first stitch marker at the armhole. Draw up a loop, chain 1 to secure. You can remove the stitch marker. Now go ahead and seam both panels together by working single crochet stitches on each stitch across. Because this is the row side and each feather stitch is worked in half double crochet stitches, just try to distribute your single crochet stitch across evenly. Once you've reached the second stitch marker, we'll be working single crochet stitches only on the back panel. So go ahead and only pick up the back panel and work single crochet stitches along that panel. And once you've reached the third stitch marker, pick up the front panel and single crochet both panels together all the way until the end. Once you've completed seaming this side, go ahead and repeat the exact same thing on the other side. Now we'll be working along the neckline and making the hoodie. Place a stitch marker roughly around your collarbone, or for me this would be about 6 inches or 15 centimeters. You insert your hook through that first stitch marker and you can remove it. Chain 1 and work single crochet stitches all the way in the round. Again, because this is the row side, try to distribute your stitches evenly across the neckline. Once you've completed working in the round, you would have passed the second stitch marker. Just readjust its position back up to the top, and from here, we'll slip stitch through the first stitch that we made earlier to close the round. Now we'll be working on row 2. On the second row, work 1 half double crochet on that last stitch that we worked on, chain 1, skip 1, and work the next half double crochet. Just like we did earlier at the bottom of the body panel, we'll chain 1, skip 1, and work a half double crochet. Do this all the way across until you reach the second stitch marker. You can now remove the second stitch marker, chain 1, and turn your work. Now we'll be starting with our feather stitch. Work 1 half double crochet on that first stitch, insert your hook through the chain space, drop a loop, yarn over, insert your hook through the single crochet skip stitch at the bottom, drop a loop, yarn over, insert your hook through the second chain space at the top, drop a loop, yarn over, and pull through all loops, chain 1. And since you already know how to do the feather stitch, go ahead and work the feather stitch all the way across, and I'll meet you back at the end of this row. Once you've reached that last stitch, which you can see it's that single half double crochet stitch, we'll close off this row with a half double crochet, just like you normally would. Chain 1 and turn your work. So we'll repeat this last row of feather stitches for a total of 11.5 inches or 29 centimeters, or until you reach the crown or the top of your head. Now go ahead and work up this number of rows, and I'll meet you back here once that's done. Once you've completed all your rows all the way to the top, it should look something like this. Now go ahead and place a stitch marker by folding the hoodie in half and placing a stitch marker where the fold meets. Now pick up where you left off, and we'll continue to feather stitch all the way until the stitch marker. So now let's do the first stitch together. Now once we've reached the stitch marker would be considered our last stitch. So go ahead and work your last feather stitch through where the stitch marker is and chain 1. And because we'll be reducing stitches, we will not be working the half double crochet. So we'll chain 1, turn our work, and go straight into another feather stitch on the next row. So just like what we did on the neckline, we'll be reducing the sides and the center of the hoodie. Now go ahead and complete this row, half double crochet on that last stitch, chain 1, turn your work, and I'll meet you back here at the end of the third row. So I've just completed my third row. As you can see, I have 2 stitches left. I'll work my last feather stitch, chain 1, and I'll repeat my last 3 rows for another set. So chain 1, turn your work, and go ahead and work that feather stitch for another 3 more rows. I'll meet you back here once you've completed all the rows. So I've just completed 6 rows, and I'll pick up my yarn exactly where the stitch marker is. We can keep our stitch marker now, and we'll be working a mirror image of what we did on the other side. So on this stitch, we'll jump straight into a feather stitch, chain 1 to secure, and go ahead and work a feather stitch. Now if you're wondering why we're doing a decrease in the center of the hoodie, it's because I've seen quite a bit of patterns that call for a straight cut at the top, and this results in a sharp tip at the back of the hoodie, which I'm not really a fan of. But with this decrease, you instead get a nice curve at the back, which I think produces a nicer, cleaner finish. Now go ahead and repeat the 6 rows that you did on the other side on a mirror image by working a decrease in the center, and I'll meet you back once you've completed all 6 rows. Now this is how our center decrease should look like, and we'll fold our work on the wrong side in order for us to seam the tops. Grab your hook and insert your hook through that first stitch and draw up a loop from the last stitch. Chain 1 to secure. Now go ahead and seam the top by working single crochet stitches across evenly, and I'll meet you back here at the decrease side. Once you've reached the corner, you'll just single crochet each stitch across evenly by distributing your stitches nicely, and I'll meet you back here once that's done. And this is how your finished hoodie should look like. And I wanted to show you, if you turn it around, you'll be able to see the nice curve at the back, which is not a sharp tip. And if you turn it to the front, it should be long enough to cover all the way up till your eyebrows, I would say. Now let's work on our sleeves. Work a slip knot and make 20 chains. This will be for all sizes. Working on the cuffs first, we'll chain 1 to start the next row, and on the second chain from the hook, insert your hook and work a single crochet. Continue working single crochets all the way across, and I'll meet you back here once that's done. On the last row, we'll chain 1, turn your work. On the second row, we'll insert a hook through the back loop, which is the loop furthest away from you, and finish off with a single crochet. So this would be your back loop single crochet stitches, which you'll be working throughout the entire cuffs. On that last row, chain 1, turn your work, and continue working the single crochet back loop stitch for a total of 28 rows. This would be for size medium, and it is basically half the number of stitches that you would need for your entire sleeve. Once you've completed your last stitch, chain 1 and turn to the row side. Here I've completed my cuffs, and it's super stretchy with this single crochet back loop stitch. Now I'll be working single crochet stitches on each row's post. So in order to find your stitch, just pull the cuff slightly and you'll be able to see those little post stitches. Now go ahead and complete the same number of stitches, and I'll meet you back here once that's done. Once you've reached the last row, chain 1 to turn. Now on this row, we'll be working half double crochet increase stitches. So we'll work 1 half double crochet, chain 1, and without skipping a stitch, we'll work another half double crochet on the next stitch. So after every half double crochet, we'll work 1 chain. Now go ahead and do this across, and I'll meet you back here once we're there. On that last stitch, we'll chain 1 and turn our work. Now we basically double the number of stitches that we'll be working on. On this next row, we'll begin our feather stitch. We'll work 1 half double crochet on that first stitch. On the next stitch, we'll work our feather stitch. So we'll insert a hook, drop a loop, yarn over. Instead of inserting our hook through that skip single crochet stitch that we normally do, we'll insert a hook through the bottom of that half double crochet stitch, drop a loop, yarn over, and insert your hook through the next chain space. Drop a loop, yarn over, and pull through all loops. So basically the only thing different with this feather stitch on this first row is that we don't have the single crochet chain space that we normally do. So let's do that again. We'll insert a hook. Now instead of looking for that single crochet chain space, we'll insert it at the bottom of that half double crochet stitch, yarn over, and insert your hook through the chain space. This row will be a little bit tight to work with at the beginning, but I promise it'll get better. So go ahead and work that feather stitch all the way across, and I'll meet you back here at the end of this row. On that last stitch, we'll close the row like we normally do with a chain 1 and half double crochet stitch. Now we'll chain 1 and turn our work and continue working the feather stitch row for a total of 49 rows for size M, or until you've reached your desired sleeve length, and I'll meet you back here once you're done. This is our finished sleeve and this is how it should look like. It's a little bit poofy at the bottom, but that's because we doubled the number of stitches. Now for the next step, we'll be seaming the sides. Fold the sleeve lengthwise while still leaving your working yarn intact. Now we'll need to place a stitch marker here at the bottom of the cuff. So I went ahead and placed one stitch marker on the 3rd stitch and another stitch marker on the 10th stitch from the bottom, and that will be for our thumb hole. Pick up your yarn where you left off and insert your hook through to the first stitch of both panels together and work a single crochet. Now just like we did before, we'll single crochet each stitch across all the way until you reach the cuffs. And because we're working on the row side, which is a half double crochet stitch, try and distribute your stitches evenly by pulling the stitches slightly apart in order to get an even stitch. Once you've reached the cuffs, we'll be working through the front and back loop only. So here I'm picking up the back loop, which is furthest away from you, and working a single crochet. Insert your hook to the first stitch and through the back loop on the next panel and single crochet. Do this for each stitch across until you reach the first stitch marker. Remove the stitch marker and on one panel just work slip stitches all the way across until the next stitch marker. On the last stitch marker, just work your last 3 single crochet stitches on both panels to close the stitch. Chain 1 to secure and bind off. Now go ahead and make a second sleeve, and then we'll proceed to joining the sleeves to the body. So I went ahead and placed the sleeves in between the body panel, making sure that the body panel is on the wrong side. For demonstration purposes, I have left the sleeves out like this. You would do this by turning the sleeves right side out and wedging the end of the sleeves through both body panels and aligning them with the armhole. Now place stitch markers along the sides of each piece together, making sure that the seam side of the sleeve is at the bottom end. Now starting from the bottom seam, we'll insert a hook through both pieces, drop a loop, chain 1, and carefully single crochet each panel together, making sure you don't miss a stitch. And again, because this is the row side, you'd have to distribute your stitches evenly across each half double crochet feather stitch. We'll be doing this all the way in a round, and I'll meet you back here to close the round. On the last stitch, you'll be able to see the first stitch that you made earlier. Just work a slip stitch, chain 1 to secure, and bind off. Now we'll repeat the entire process again on the other sleeve, and I'll meet you back here once you've completed both sleeves. Now we have one more piece to go, and that will be the pockets. So here we'll pick up a yarn and work a slip knot. Work a total of 32 chains. On the next row, we'll chain 1 to turn and work half double crochet stitches. Now go ahead and work half double crochet stitches on each stitch across, and I'll meet you back here at the end of this row. On that last stitch, chain 1, and you should have a total of 8.5 inches or 21.5 centimeters. So this would be slightly longer than the pocket that you made on the body panel. That's because we want larger pockets on the inside. Just to double check against our body panel, the pocket should reach just above the last stitch and about an inch above the top pocket opening. And if the size looks right, go ahead and work a total of 24 rows of half double crochet stitches, or longer if you prefer, and I'll meet you back here once you've completed both pockets. Once you've completed your pocket, it should look something like this, and now let's go ahead and place this against our body panel. Place your body panel wrong side out while facing the front panel, and place your pocket piece along the sides while making sure that the bottom of the pocket sits nicely on the last row. Now turn your work to the side and have your tapestry needle ready to whip stitch the pieces together. You can start at whichever side you prefer, but here I'll be starting at the bottom of the pocket opening. The best way to do this will be to hold the body panel and the pocket piece together and whip stitch along. So we'll do this until the end of the pocket piece. We'll turn our work again to work on the bottom side. And because I have that row, I'll be whip stitching along that row and using that row as my guide. So I'll do this all the way across, and I'll show you how I do it differently on the other side. So I've made my way all the way up to the middle of the body section, and what I'm doing here is basically picking up one of the feather stitches strand to work my whip stitch. I'm not going all the way through because I want to keep the stitches on the front side invisible. So go ahead and continue whip stitching all the way across until the end, and I'll meet you back here to close up the pockets. So once we've completed the last few stitches of the pocket opening, you can see I have 3 layers here. I'll pick up the first and third layer, which is the pocket piece and the back panel, and I'll be closing them with a whip stitch. So make sure when you do your whip stitch, you're not stitching up the middle section, which is the front panel's piece. So go ahead and close up this window, and then once you're at the end, just weave in and bind off. Now repeat this whole step again and go ahead and finish off the second pocket. And this is how your finished pocket should look like, with invisible seams. And you're done. Just weave in all the ends and go and get cozy with your new hoodie sweater. I appreciate you taking your time to watch my videos, and if you have any question, please feel free to drop me a note below. And if you would like to see more videos like this, don't forget to click the subscribe button and notification bell. I hope to see you soon. Bye!